All right, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark, back now on the Gamecock Central YouTube. Quick hit commitment reaction here on Derwin Burgess from Riverdale, Georgia, who commits to the Gamecocks on Thursday afternoon. Sort of expected, but someone that I think the last, you would probably say, a couple of months has emerged as a major target for South Carolina. He didn't really say he had a number 2 school, but I think most people assumed the number 2 school was Georgia Tech. They were actually a public leader at one point, had been there, I think, probably more than anywhere else. But I thought, Chris, a similar story. It kind of reminded me of Trinilius Tatum just from the way it played out. Georgia Tech put a lot of effort into Trinilius Tatum, had him on campus, was in the lead. Now, the timetable was maybe shifted a little bit differently with Burgess, but Burgess really, I think, only had the one visit to South Carolina, at least the major visit where he got to look at everything and visited, sort of right before everything got shut down in that window early in 2020 when prospects were still able to visit. And, Chris, it just sounded like, our Chad Simmons had him talk to him about everything. It sounded like the effort from the staff, but just that visit sort of put South Carolina over the top compared to Georgia Tech, which if there's one school South Carolina has really, I would say, injured in the 2020 class so far, or 2021 class, I should say, it would have to be Georgia Tech, because it seems like they've sort of battled on some guys in state. And, again, the one visit for South Carolina with Burgess really just seemed to put them over the top.
Yeah, I think it was good timing for South Carolina that, everything with the recruiting shutdown played out a little bit later so that they were able to get some guys on campus earlier in the year. And, Burgess, it was they do a good job typically when they get these guys on campus in terms of either, making an impression to where they develop sort of some long-term staying power with them. And Burgess was certainly one of those guys. And then, things shut down and they continue to be shut down and you don't really know how much longer it's going to go. So he didn't jump into a commitment super early for those reasons, but it just came a time where he's really been looking at making that choice for quite some time. I think it was probably about a month or so ago, Wes, where he sort of told us, hey, I want to do something in the next 3 or 4 weeks, or otherwise sometime soon. It's pretty evident that South Carolina was in a good spot. For Burgess, Brian McClendon was recruiting him early on in the process. Things sort of I don't want to say things got messed up, but there's maybe a little bit of a hiccup in just in terms of a little bit of, hey, what's going to happen here? What's the new, who's my new coach potentially going to be if I go to South Carolina? And so Joe Cox took over, and I really think Cox's, familiarity with coaching with Mike Bobo having that track record and being able to show him, hey, Joe Cox has coached receivers under Mike Bobo. He's played in the system. He knows the system extremely well. And from there also built a good relationship. And I think all those things weighed into it. And Burgess, like you said, Wes, really liked the visit and was really comfortable with everything and just ready to go ahead and get things done.
Yeah, we're seeing this trend where South Carolina is recruiting guys that are athletes. And, when I say that, obviously you're talking about guys that play multiple positions, have some versatility to their game. And, generally those are also the guys that you're going to sort of look to use in, potentially multiple ways. I think Burgess, you look at the film, which we're about to turn on here in a second, definitely sort of more of that slot guy. You can use him in the jet sweep game. We'll sort of go into the big picture here in a second, but as we turn on the film, what have your thoughts sort of, and here you see him in motion into the backfield here. Similar to the way we've seen South Carolina use some guys in the past. What are your sort of initial thoughts on Burgess as a player as we watch him here?
Well, I think there's a good bit to like, and you mentioned playing in the slot. I think he could certainly do that, and that's been a selling point for South Carolina on the trail, is just, being able to utilize some guys in some different ways. And, obviously now South Carolina has the benefit of they can point to a guy like Deebo Samuel that they developed from his time on campus, and he was utilized in some different ways. He did some of the jet sweep type stuff at times during his career, and so that's something that they sell. But when you look at Burgess, he is pretty versatile, and obviously had some offers to go play safety in college and could do that as well, and was really technically on South Carolina's board as an athlete. But when you look at him, you do like the potential with him, and of him with the ball in his hands. He's got quickness in short areas. He can give you a vertical presence because he does have speed. I think he's got some elusiveness in the open field. He's got some ball skills, as you saw earlier, going up and getting that football on the sideline. And here you see he can, make some guys miss in the open field and go score, and has some explosiveness to his game. So you can see why South Carolina liked his potential. And again, just sort of fitting that trend of guys who can maybe play multiple spots effectively and go be athletes. He looks like an instinctual player on film, a guy that has some explosiveness, has some athleticism, and could be used in a variety of ways on this team, I think.
Yeah, and not the biggest guy in the world, but I do think he plays with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. That was one thing Chad Simmons had mentioned. He kind of plays offense with a defensive player's mindset, and that he's sort of an aggressive guy. Just plays like he has something to prove, which I think if you are, if you're not the biggest guy in the world, that's that can help. So yeah, we've sort of mentioned this. I think, wow, it's a nice move there. And that catch, to me, the most impressive thing we've seen on film so far here was that catch you referenced a minute ago, like the second play of this highlight tape, just showing off the ball skills and being able to go up and get the football. Not all slot guys sort of also have that ability to go catch the ball down the field, and I think he showed it. But yeah, this trend that South Carolina has sort of decided to take a bunch of these just athletic kids that are versatile, that can play multiple spots, and then you kind of just I think you try to get them on campus and slot them where it best fits. And considering the how different recruiting is right now because of coronavirus, how different the evaluation process has been, I think there's some merit to doing it that way. But when I look at him, I sort of group him in, I would say, with Simeon Price, and I would say maybe with Sam Reynolds. I think Jaden Johnson also, if you just looked at it, you say, well, Jaden Johnson's another guy listed as an athlete. He's from Georgia. I think I can sort of separate them. I think Jaden's more than likely, maybe a corner, but probably a safety or nickel. And just in my eyes, I look at Omega Blake, even though I think he's a receiver, I think he's probably more of like an outside guy, or like you've talked about, maybe ends up at cornerback. So when you look at Derwin, and then of course these other guys I'm talking about, Sam Reynolds and Simeon Price, what do you sort of see as the similarities and differences between those three guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And I think you just listed, 5 guys who could technically be on the board as an athlete, and I think are on the board as an athlete. And so, yeah, I'm with you that Johnson is, a defensive guy. Blake, I do think will start on offense. I potentially like him more on the defensive side of the ball, but that's just me. Might be more likely to start on offense. But when you mention these 3 guys that have probably more similarities, whether it's in terms of size or skill set, Reynolds is obviously that smaller guy. And so when you look at him, you see a potential, and I don't want to put this on him because they are different types of players too, but he's got more of that like Ace Sanders-esque size. He's about 5'8", right? So he's a smaller guy. He's almost definitely not going to be your outside receiver type. He's more of just sort of a guy who can do a lot of different things, whether it's like a scat back, or he can go help you out on special teams as a returner. He can play in the slot some. He can line up in the backfield some. To me, Price and Burgess are maybe a little bit more receivers. I think Burgess is a little bit more of a straight slot receiver. The thing that you mentioned, Wes, before we came on here when we were talking, is that South Carolina sort of sold some of these guys, and rightfully so. It's a smart strategy on sort of like a Debo-esque role and his production and maybe some of the types of things he's done. And obviously that's a good thing for them to do on the trail. Now, they're not going to be able to have 3-4 guys, do those exact same things. But, when I look at these guys, I think Burgess, in terms of size and maybe skill set, would be the most similar to Debo. I don't think they're the same player at all. Debo is a guy we loved coming out of high school, and obviously he developed into a really good player. But I think Burgess is a similar size coming out of high school. When you look at what Debo was coming out, what Burgess is, Debo obviously got bigger, but he had sort of that, the vertical presence, but he could also caught the ball really well. He could play in the slot. He could play outside. I see some of those similarities. Simeon Price, to me, is – mean, shoot, he played, 7 positions probably for his high school last year, and could play safety, could play nickel or corner, could play running back, could play receiver. And, I think, maybe at the beginning, just because of how recruiting has gone and his preference and the staff preference, might be more likely to start out at receiver. But to me, when you look at him in terms of a guy who you maybe put in the backfield a little bit more, if you decide to do that, I think it'd be Price, because he's built a little bit more like a running back, right? If that makes sense. So I do think there's some differences in those guys, where Burgess is a little bit more of a straight receiver to me. Price is sort of a do-it-all type of guy. And I think Reynolds, is a little bit more of a space guy, where you find some situations to put him in and try to get him in space as well.
Yeah, and again, man, the physicality that Price plays with, I mean, I like him with the ball in his hands, but also I look at that guy, the way he hits people, especially at the high school level. I think he could make a great safety, as well. Just depending on, I mean, again, that's sort of the value of getting guys that can play multiple spots is, where is there a greater team need? Where do they fit in better? You can figure all those things out. And, that's not even to mention a guy like Caleb McDowell, who is really slotted more as a running back, but really I think could help you in a variety of ways as well. So that's the trend. You're going to hear us, if you watch these videos, you're going to hear us talk about that probably a ton the next 6 months. But that to me is the biggest trend with South Carolina's class moving forward. So that's going to do it for this video. Please hit the subscribe button. And, of course, please check us out on GamecockCentral.com. For Chris Clark, I'm Wes Mitchell. We'll see you next time.